Before you close your eyes tonight, take a deep breath and let the cold northern wind carry you to another time. A time when God still walked among the clouds, when love could move mountains, and when even the tears of a goddess could change the face of the world. If you enjoy peaceful journeys through the Norse realms, remember to follow myth sleep stories, where ancient hearts still whisper you to sleep. This is the story of Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and magic, and the loss that turned her tears into gold. Long before the flames of Ragnarok or the wars of Asgard, there was peace in Vanaheim, the land of fertility and calm. The fields shimmered with life. Rivers sparkled like veins of silver, and the wind carried laughter instead of cries. Freya lived among her kin, radiant and warm, her spirit wild as the sea. Her husband, Opear, was unlike any other, quiet where she was bright, thoughtful where she was passionate. Together they balanced each other, their love like sunrise and twilight, always meeting at the horizon dot, but even gods are not immune to longing. Opear was a wanderer. Some said he sought wisdom. Others said he chased the fading beauty of the world before it vanished. One day, without a word, he left. No farewell, no promise, only silence. When the dawn came, Freya found his cloak still folded beside their bed. She called his name across the hills, through forests and valleys, but the wind gave no answer. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Freya's laughter faded. The goddess who had once made flowers bloom now walked beneath gray skies. Her golden hair dimmed with dust and grief. She left her home in Vanaheim and began to wander the 9 realms in search of her lost love. She walked barefoot through Midgard, where mortals toiled and sang. She crossed the misty bridges into Alfheim, where the light elves danced in gardens of silver. She climbed the frozen mountains of Jotunheim, where giants watched her in awe. Each time she asked the same question, "Have you seen him?" And each time, silence was the answer. At night, she rested beside rivers and cried softly, her tears falling onto stone. Where they touched the earth, gold bloomed like flowers, small, perfect, radiant. Mortals who later found them called them treasures. They didn't know that every piece of gold in the world came from the sorrow of a goddess who had lost everything but hope. In Asgard, the gods whispered about her. Odin watched from his high seat, seeing her wander across realms. "Even love," he said quietly, "has its price." Frigg placed a hand on his arm. "She will find him," she said, "or she will find herself." Odin did not answer. He knew both could be true. Freya's journey continued. She learned the tongues of spirits, the hidden paths of wind, and the quiet songs of the night. Her magic grew stronger, but her heart remained heavy. She began to see love not as a gift, but as a force that binds and breaks alike. One evening, while resting at the edge of a frozen lake, she looked at her reflection. Her eyes were still bright, but they carried the distance of stars. She whispered, "O Piar, where have you gone?" The wind moved across the ice as if trying to answer, carrying faint echoes of her own voice back to her. She smiled sadly and said, "Then I will keep walking." The seasons turned. The 9 realms changed. Yet Freya never stopped. She gathered the feathers of falcons to make herself wings, flying across mountains and seas. She rode her chariot drawn by 2 great cats through forests and clouds. Every place she passed, gold dust settled, her tears scattered in the wind. Mortals began to tell stories about her, the woman in gold who traveled between worlds, leaving beauty and sorrow wherever she went. Some called her a blessing, others a ghost, but Freya heard none of it. She only listened for one thing, the sound of Okr's footsteps returning to her. One night, beneath the northern lights, she dreamed. In her dream, Opiar stood by the shore, looking out at a sea that glowed like glass. He turned to her, eyes filled with both love and distance. "You will find me," he said, "but not in the way you expect." When she reached for him, he dissolved into light. Freya woke with tears on her cheeks, and the snow beneath her turned to gold. She understood then that love's truest form is not possession, but remembrance. It lives not in holding, but in continuing. She rose, the wind catching her hair, and walked toward the dawn. The world shimmered where she stepped, and though she never saw Opear again, his name became the heartbeat of her magic. Wherever she went, love followed, not as joy, but as the quiet strength to keep walking through eternity. Freya wandered for what felt like centuries. The roads between worlds had grown thin, and even the bridges of light that once connected them had dimmed. Yet she pressed on, following only the faint echo of her heart, a rhythm that whispered Oker's name through every gust of wind dot. Sometimes she thought she saw him, a shadow disappearing behind a dune of golden sand, a reflection at the edge of a lake, a figure walking away as she arrived. But each time she reached out, there was only air. The mortals of Midgard had begun to worship her without knowing her sorrow. They saw her beauty, her golden chariot pulled by two cats across the evening sky, and believed she was joy itself. They prayed for love, for fertility, for gentle hearts. But Freya, hearing their voices, felt only the irony. They were calling upon a goddess who knew love only as absence dot in the halls of Asgard. The other gods debated her endless wandering. Thor shook his head. "She's wasting herself. There are worlds to protect, yet she searches for one man." Frigg, calm as ever, replied, "And what would you give for the one you love, Thunderer?" Thor had no answer. Odin listened silently. He saw in Freya's journey something no one else could, a reflection of his own. For Odin had once sacrificed his eye to see the hidden truth of the cosmos. Freya was sacrificing her joy to understand the truth of love. Both acts were roads to wisdom, and both came with pain. One day, Freya reached the edge of Niflheim, where the air was sharp and still. The ground was frozen glass, and whispers of the dead curled like smoke through the dark. She had followed a rumor that Oker's soul had wandered there. She walked among the silent spirits, her golden tears melting the frost beneath her feet. At the gates of hell, she met the Queen of Death herself. Hell was not cruel. She was stillness made flesh, her face half radiant, half shadow. "Why do you disturb my realm, goddess of love?" she asked. Freya bowed her head. "I seek the one I have lost." Hell regarded her for a long moment. "You speak of Opiar," she said at last. "He does not walk my halls. His soul is not here. Then where?" Freya whispered. Hell's gaze softened. "He walks where memory ends. You will not find him by searching outward." Freya didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "Love is not a chain to bind another," Hel said. "It is a mirror. You are looking into your own reflection, and it is breaking." Freya lowered her eyes, but before she could speak again, the dead stirred. From the fog rose countless faces, men, women, children, all staring, not with fear, but with longing. Her tears glowed brighter, casting golden light across their hollow forms. For a moment, the dead smiled. Hel watched quietly. "You bring warmth even here," she said. "Remember that." Freya turned and left, but Hel's words followed her like echoes. "You will not find him by looking outward." She returned to the living realms, carrying that sentence like a secret seed. She crossed rivers of fire and fields of snow. Wherever she passed, flowers grew in winter and frost sparkled in summer. The realms responded to her presence. Her grief was reshaping creation itself. In Elfheim, the light elves greeted her with reverence. They offered her wine made from moonlight and silver leaves. "Your tears have changed the rivers," they said. Gold now flows through the earth. Even the dwarves in Svartalfheim mine what was born from your sorrow. Freya looked down at her hands, still shimmering faintly. Then my pain has made them rich, she said softly. One of the elves smiled kindly. Pain and beauty often share a root, Lady Freya. You remind us that even sorrow can create light. She stayed among them for a while, resting in their glowing forests. But rest brought dreams, and dreams brought memory. In one, she saw Opir again, not as he was, but as she remembered him. His eyes were like the calm before dawn, and his smile was small but endless. He said nothing, only reached for her hand. When she tried to hold him, her fingers passed through air. She woke with tears once again turning to gold in the morning dew. Freya began to realize that her tears were more than grief, they were transformation. Each drop carried part of her essence, her magic, her life force. The gold spreading through the realms was her love turned visible. Mortals would shape it into coins and crowns, but its true purpose was far older. A reminder that beauty can be born from heartbreak. In Asgard, Odin finally spoke. She walks the line between creation and destruction, he said. Every tear changes the 9 realms. Frigg nodded. She is learning what none of us dared to. Loki, lounging nearby, smirked. Or she's simply losing her mind. Odin's gaze was cold. Then madness is another form of wisdom. Meanwhile, Freya's cats grew tired. They would stop often, resting their paws on soft moss or snow. She would stroke them gently and whisper, "Just a little further." They purred, understanding. Even the beasts seemed to share her devotion. She crossed the skies once more, her chariot gliding over clouds heavy with twilight. Below her, humans looked up and saw streaks of gold dust falling. They thought it was magic. In truth, it was her tears, still descending, still creating beauty from lost dot. As she descended toward Midgard again, she found a small village by the sea. The people were kind, offering her shelter without knowing who she was. They told her that strange golden stones had begun washing up on the shore after every storm. Freya walked to the beach that night and found them, small, smooth, glowing faintly in the moonlight. She held one in her palm and felt warmth. Her eyes closed, and for a moment she heard Okr's voice carried in the wind. "You have never been alone." When she opened her eyes, the stone had melted into light and vanished. She smiled for the first time in an age. Not because the pain was gone, but because she understood. Love wasn't something to find or lose. It was the current that moved through everything, even sorrow. Freya returned to Asgard with the first light of dawn. The golden dust from her tears still clung to her cloak, faintly glowing as she stepped through the gates of the gods. The Aesir had gathered to watch her approach, silent and unsure of what to say. Even the sky seemed to pause, the clouds hanging still, waiting. She had left them as the goddess of joy, the bringer of passion and beauty. Now she returned as something else quieter, older, as if she had walked through centuries of silence and come back, carrying the weight of the world. Odin rose from his high seat as she entered. His single eye glimmered with understanding. "You have walked far, Freya of the Vanir," he said. Freya bowed her head slightly. "Farther than I thought possible." He studied her for a moment. "Did you find what you sought?" She looked past him, to the horizon beyond Asgard's walls, where light met shadow. "No," she said softly. "But I found what I needed." Odin nodded. "Then your journey was not in vain." Thor shifted uncomfortably. "You searched the realms for love and found nothing. What meaning is there in that?" Freya smiled faintly. "Not all treasure shines, Thunderer. Some treasures teach." At that, even Loki fell silent. Freya turned and walked toward the great hall where Frigg waited. The goddess of foresight and motherhood embraced her without words. For the first time in an age, Freya allowed herself to rest. She slept for 3 days and 3 nights, and in her dreams, she saw the world made of threads, each one a connection between hearts, lives, moments. Some threads were bright and strong, others frayed and trembling, but all of them were woven together into one great pattern. When she awoke, she understood what hell had meant. Love was not a path that led outward. It was a mirror that reflected what already lived within Dot in the days that followed. Freya began to rebuild the gardens of Asgard. The fields that had wilted during her absence bloomed again, but the flowers were different now. Their colors were softer, their fragrance deeper. The other gods noticed. She brings peace now, one said. Before, she brought desire. Odin watched her work and thought of his own sacrifices, the well, the tree, the runes. He realized that her pain had become another form of wisdom, one he could never earn through knowledge alone. Where his quest had led him to understanding, hers had led her to compassion. At dusk, Freya often sat alone by the lake below Bifrost, the rainbow bridge. The water shimmered with reflections of passing realms. Sometimes she would see faces mortals praying, lovers embracing, children laughing. She began to bless them quietly, sending a touch of her golden magic into their lives. A husband would return home safely from the sea. A mother would find her lost child. A lonely heart would dream of someone who understood. Her power no longer demanded worship. It asked only to heal. One evening, Loki joined her by the lake. "You've become quiet," he said, tossing a pebble into the water. "I've learned silence," she replied. He smirked. "Does silence teach you love?" Freya looked at him, unbothered. "It teaches me to listen." Loki tilted his head, almost amused. "And what do you hear?" "Everything," she said simply. For a moment, even he had no clever answer. In time, Freya began teaching the mortals again. Through whispers carried by dreams, she reminded them of gentleness. Lovers who fought would wake the next morning with peace in their hearts. Farmers who despaired over barren fields would suddenly find golden soil after rain. She moved unseen. Her presence felt more than seen. Yet not all among the gods understood her change. Sif, golden-haired wife of Thor, once asked her, "Do you not miss what you were? The fire, the adoration?" Freya smiled. "Fire still burns, but it has learned not to consume." Her words spread quietly, turning into the kind of wisdom that doesn't shout but stays. Still, there were nights when the ache returned, the empty space beside her, the memory of Okr's laughter carried by the wind. During those nights, she would walk alone into the forest beyond Asgard's walls. There she would sit beneath an ancient birch and speak to the stars. "I understand now," she would whisper, "but that does not mean I have forgotten." And the stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if in answer. One night, as she sat by the lake again, Odin approached her. "The gold that fills the mortal lands," he said. "Did you intend it?" She shook her head. "No, it was not meant to be treasure. It was meant to be memory." Odin looked thoughtful. "Then the world mistakes grief for wealth." "They always will," Freya replied. "But sometimes even mistakes can hold beauty." He regarded her for a long time. "You have changed, Freya of the Vanir." "So have you, All-Father," she said with a gentle smile. The two sat together in silence, watching the stars fade into dawn. For a brief moment, Asgard itself felt still. No wars, no fears, no noise. Just the quiet hum of eternity. In the years that followed, mortals continued to find gold in rivers and caves. They built kingdoms upon it, fought wars over it, crowned kings with it. None of them knew its true origin, that every coin was once a tear shed for love. But in rare moments, when a goldsmith would pause and look closely at the metal's gleam, they would feel something, a pulse, a warmth, as if the gold itself remembered where it came from. And somewhere far above, Freya would smile, because memory, like love, never truly dies. It only changes form. And as she looked out over the sea, the northern lights above her reflected in her tears, turning the world into gold once more. Centuries passed like waves folding over one another, soft and slow. The world changed, but Freya remained. Her name drifted through languages, shifting, fading, and returning again. To some she was a goddess. To others, a memory half remembered from a dream. But her presence still pulsed beneath the surface of things, in gold, in beauty. In longing, the mortals who once prayed for her favor had forgotten her face. Yet they still carried her essence in the shimmer of their desire. They had taken her tears, mined them from mountains, pulled them from rivers, melted them into crowns and coins. What was once sorrow had become the foundation of ambition. Gold, born of love's loss, had become the weight of human greed. Freya watched this from afar, her eyes calm but sad. From her seat on the edge of the clouds, she could see the flicker of torches in mortal cities, gold glittering under firelight, worshipped not as memory, but as power. She did not curse them. She only sighed, because she understood. Even gods cannot change the nature of what hearts crave. In the stillness of her realm, her cats slept beside her. She stroked their soft fur as she watched humanity shape the future with her tears. They do not know what they hold, she murmured. They wear grief upon their skin and call it beauty. Odin visited her then, cloaked in gray, his ravens perched upon his shoulders. You gave them light, he said. They turned it into shadow. Freya did not look away from the world below. They are still learning, she replied. Odin's single eye glowed faintly in the dim. Will they ever understand? One day, she said, when the weight of gold no longer feels like worth, they will remember what it truly meant, the love that made it. Odin nodded, though his gaze carried a trace of sorrow. You are patient, Freya of the Vanir. She smiled faintly. Love taught me patience. He left her in silence, and she continued to watch as ages rolled forward. The mortals built empires on her tears. Kings demanded gold for loyalty. Warriors fought for it. Temples adorned with it rose toward the heavens, yet none were built for her. Still, she remained gentle. When greed tore kingdoms apart, she would send small signs, a dream, a song, a vision, to those who remembered. A poor craftsman might wake one morning and decide to give his gold away. A queen might look at her jewels and feel nothing but heaviness. These small awakenings were her way of restoring balance. In time, poets began to write of a woman in gold who wept for the world. They didn't know her name, but the image spread. Painters captured her face without ever having seen it. Sculptors carved figures of a goddess looking toward the sea, her tears caught mid-fall. And though their hands did not know her truth, their hearts did. Through them, Freya lived again. There were nights when she descended to Midgard unseen, walking through streets filled with laughter and smoke. She would see lovers holding hands and smile softly. When she passed beggars sleeping beneath bridges, she would leave small flecks of gold dust near their feet, not for wealth, but for hope. Her magic was subtle now, almost invisible, a whisper of warmth in the cold. Once, she entered a temple built to a new god. The air was heavy with incense, and golden light flooded from candles and ornaments. She walked among the statues unnoticed, her presence like a breath of wind. At the altar stood a priest, murmuring prayers for abundance. Freya paused beside him. You ask for gold, she said softly, though he could not hear. But what you truly ask for is love. The priest's hands trembled, though he did not know why. Later that night, he would dream of a woman dressed in light, weeping softly as the sky turned to dawn. Freya left without a trace. In Asgard, her garden grew wild. Flowers of every hue shimmered in perpetual twilight. Some said the blooms were fed not by water, but by memory. The petals carried faint glimmers of gold, glowing only when touched by moonlight. The gods rarely entered her garden. They said it made them feel too much. Frigg visited once. "You carry peace like a burden," she said gently. Freya smiled. "Peace is never heavy once you've known sorrow." The two goddesses sat together in silence, watching stars bloom over the horizon. "Do you ever wish you could forget him?" Frigg asked quietly. Freya shook her head. "If I forgot, I would lose more than him. I would lose what I became." Frigg placed a hand over hers. "Then you have found a kind of immortality even we cannot claim." Freya's gaze softened. "Immortality is not living forever. It is being remembered in the way the world feels when it loves." And indeed, she was dot in mortal hearts, her story twisted into myth, her tears into legend. They said the gold that gleamed beneath mountains was the blood of the earth, not the sorrow of a goddess. But every now and then, a child would find a gold flake in the river and hold it to the sun, marveling at its glow. And in that moment of pure wonder, Freya's spirit stirred, for innocence has a way of touching truth. As centuries turned into millennia, humanity's hunger for gold only deepened. Empires rose, fell, and rose again. Yet Freya's presence lingered in small, quiet ways. A mother's forgiveness, a stranger's kindness, a tear shed without shame. She no longer sought au pair in the world beyond. She found him in every act of love that defied despair. He had become part of her, as the sea becomes the sky when the horizon blurs. Sometimes she would whisper his name into the wind, not from longing, but gratitude. "You taught me what even gods forget," she would say. "That love is not kept, it is given." And when those words reached Midgard, they would stir inside sleeping hearts, soft as gold dust settling on dreams. Freya smiled then, closing her eyes as dawn touched the edge of Asgard. The world was imperfect, restless, and loud, yet within its chaos still shimmered the quiet beauty of love remembered. And for her, that was enough. The world changed again, as it always does. The gods faded from memory, their stories softened into bedtime tales, their names spoken only by scholars and dreamers. The mortals built new cities, reaching higher than the mountains of old. Their towers shone with lights brighter than stars, and their streets pulsed with endless noise. Yet beneath it all, gold still gleamed, the same gold born from Freya's tears, the same glow that once carried love and sorrow. They no longer called it sacred. They called it wealth. Freya watched from the edge of time, quiet and still. She had stopped appearing in visions long ago. Humanity had grown too busy to dream of gods. They had filled their nights with machines that hummed louder than silence. Still, she could feel them. Every heartbeat, every longing, every small act of kindness, all were threads in the tapestry she had once seen in her sleep. Her garden in Asgard lay untouched, its flowers still blooming under starlight. The other gods rarely came now. Odin wandered beyond the veil, Thor slept beneath the storms, and Loki's laughter had long since vanished into myth. Only Freya remained awake, her presence like a soft light that refused to fade. Sometimes she wondered if the mortals would ever stop chasing her tears. They had found them buried deep beneath oceans and mountains, melted them into circuits, jewelry, and symbols of power. The world now ran on the shine of her sorrow. And yet she did not despise them for it. "They seek warmth," she whispered to herself, "even if they've forgotten what warmth truly means." On quiet nights, she would walk unseen through the mortal world. Her feet left no trace, but the air shimmered faintly where she passed. She would wander into cities filled with glass and light, stand beside rivers that reflected neon instead of moonlight. and watched the faces of people who had forgotten to look up. She saw them clutching their small golden objects, eyes full of hunger and fear. And still, she loved them. Once, in a quiet park, she sat beside an old woman feeding birds at dawn. The woman hummed softly, unaware of the divine presence beside her. Freya looked at her wrinkled hands, at the crumbs she scattered so gently, and smiled. In that motion, simple, kind, unselfish, she saw the echo of her own heart. "Still there," she murmured. "Even now." The birds sang, and the morning felt whole, but not all hearts held gentleness. Freya saw how humanity tore itself apart for the gold she once wept. Wars burned continents. Empires rose and crumbled under the same gleam that once came from her eyes. Kings grew cruel, traders ruthless, and even the poorest dreamed not of peace, but of possession. Her tears had become the mirror of their greed. Yet for every tyrant, there was a child who looked at gold and saw beauty instead of power. For every battle fought over it, there was a craftsman who shaped it into something that made others smile. For every cry of rage, there was a song of hope. And in those small moments, Freya still lived. Erden Devum 5. Part Yatsulakasi began to understand that even distortion had meaning. Humans had turned her sorrow into greed, but greed, too, would one day exhaust itself. When hearts grew tired of wanting, they would remember what it meant to love without owning. She had seen this pattern before, in gods, in worlds, in herself. Everything circles back. Centuries rolled forward, blending into one another until time itself felt like mist. The mortals invented new words for faith and progress, yet all carried the same longing. They built machines that reached for the stars, searching for new homes among distant suns. Freya watched them go and smiled. "Still searching," she said softly. "Still chasing what cannot be held." Sometimes a whisper of her magic would slip through their world, a glimmer in a child's eyes, a golden hue in a dream, the warmth in a stranger's kindness. Most ignored it, dismissing it as chance. A few felt something deeper, something ancient stirring within them. Those few would write stories, paint visions, sing songs about a love that endures beyond time. They didn't know they were remembering her. In one such moment, a poet sat by a window, rain tracing slow paths down the glass. He wrote about a goddess whose tears became gold, about how every coin in a man's hand once came from love, and how the weight of it carried a memory of grief. When he finished, he felt calm, though he didn't know why. Freya had been there, unseen, guiding his hand with the softest breath. Her influence no longer thundered across realms, it whispered between breaths. It lived in art, in dreams, in the unspoken tenderness that survived every age. Back in Asgard, her cats stirred beside her once more. Their fur shimmered faintly with starlight as she stroked them. "They will return," she whispered. "Not to worship, but to remember." The wind carried her words through the branches of the world tree, across galaxies and into sleeping minds. Somewhere on Earth, a child dreamed of a woman draped in gold, her tears falling into the sea. The child didn't know her name, but woke the next morning with a strange feeling, a mix of peace and sadness. She went to her mother and said, "I think the sky cried for love last night." And far above, Freya smiled again, because that was enough. Even as mortals forgot her face, they could not erase the feeling she had left behind. Every act of kindness, every moment of awe, every tear shed for love, all were fragments of her essence. Scattered but alive, she was no longer a goddess who needed temples or offerings. She had become something greater, a memory written into the rhythm of existence. And when dawn broke, the light that touched the world carried the faintest hue of gold, not the gold of greed or power, but the gold of love remembered, the kind that lingers quietly, Forever in the quiet hum of the modern world, Freya's name had long been forgotten. The gods were stories, the myths were metaphors, and the ancient songs that once echoed through the mountains had faded into static. Yet something still lingered, something that could not die because it was never truly born. Love, longing, beauty, grief, the essence of Freya still flowed through the veins of humankind. She walked again, unseen, through cities that never slept. The lights were brighter now, but they carried the same fire she once saw in the stars above Vanaheim. She wandered through crowded streets, past faces illuminated by screens and dreams. Nobody looked up. Nobody felt the air shift when she passed. But sometimes a child would stop and stare at the empty space she had just left, sensing something familiar, like a memory of warmth they couldn't name. Freya no longer wore her cloak of feathers or rode her chariot of cats. She moved through thoughts instead of clouds, through dreams instead of skies. The world had changed form, so she changed with it. Her magic no longer glowed in gold dust, but in emotion, in the sudden stillness that comes before a kiss, in the quiet tears shed in solitude, in the strange peace that arrives after heartbreak. She was everywhere and nowhere. In one small city by the northern sea, a woman named Elise lived alone in a narrow apartment filled with books and fading light. She didn't believe in gods, but she dreamed often of an endless field glowing in gold. Each time, she saw a woman standing at the horizon, her hair flowing like sunlight through mist. The woman never spoke, but her eyes held a sadness Elise could feel in her bones. One night, after a long day that had drained her completely, Elise fell asleep by the window as rain whispered against the glass. In her dream, she stood in that golden field once more. The air was soft, alive with the hum of something ancient. And there she was again, the woman in gold. "Who are you?" Elise asked. The woman smiled. "Someone who remembers what you've forgotten." Elise frowned. "What have I forgotten?" "That love was once sacred," the woman said gently. "That every tear you cry is gold." Elise looked down. Her hands were trembling. When she raised them, she saw droplets falling, shimmering, glowing faintly before they vanished. "What does it mean?" she whispered. The woman's eyes softened. "It means you are made of the same light as I am. You only need to remember." When Elise awoke, her pillow was damp with tears. She touched them, expecting nothing, but for a heartbeat. They shimmered with a faint golden hue before fading into the fabric. She sat in silence, her heart racing and calm all at once. Something had changed. That day, she walked through the city differently. She noticed the small things, the laughter of a child, the way morning light touched the water, the way strangers smiled at one another without reason. She felt connected, not to anyone in particular, but to everything. Freya watched her from the space between moments, unseen but proud. "She remembers," she whispered, "and she will remind others." In the days that followed, Elise began painting again. She had once studied art, but had given it up, convinced it no longer mattered. Now her hands moved with purpose she couldn't explain. She painted the woman from her dream, radiant, sad, strong. Gold spilled across the canvas, as if guided by something more than pigment. When she finished, she stepped back and wept quietly. She didn't know it, but her painting would soon hang in a gallery. People would stop and stare, unable to say why it moved them. Some would feel a lump in their throat, others a strange comfort. And when they went home, some would dream of golden light, of warmth, of forgiveness. Through Elise, Freya's story had begun to stir again. In Asgard, on whatever remained of it, the air shifted. The gardens of the gods had been silent for ages, but that night, the flowers began to glow faintly. The petals turned toward the unseen sun, as if responding to a distant call. Freya walked among them, her fingers grazing the blossoms. "They remember too," she said softly. From the far reaches of the universe, Odin watched. His single eye gleamed through dimensions unseen by mortals. "The pattern continues," he murmured. "The cycle never ends." Freya turned her gaze upward. "Love never ends. It only sleeps until it's remembered." Odin nodded, a faint smile crossing his ancient face. "Then perhaps the mortals are wiser than we thought." Freya laughed softly, a sound like wind chimes in a forgotten forest. "Wiser, perhaps, or just as lost. But they feel, and that's enough." Down in the mortal world, Elise couldn't stop painting. Every night, she dreamed of Freya, not always as a goddess, sometimes as a reflection of herself. The line between myth and memory blurred. Her studio filled with images of golden tears, of women looking toward the horizon, of hands reaching through time. The gallery owner asked her once, "Who is she?" Elise thought for a long moment before answering. "Someone who remembers love?" The phrase caught on. It became the title of her collection. Someone who remembers love. People from around the world came to see it. Some left in silence, others in tears. Freya's magic had returned, not through worship or sacrifice, but through empathy, through art, through human connection, through the soft and unseen bond that ties every heart to every other. And so, without altars or temples, the goddess of love was reborn, not as a deity above humanity, but as a feeling within it. That night, when the last visitor left the gallery, Elise stood before her favorite painting, the first one she had ever made, and whispered, "Thank you." Freya's voice, gentle and distant, answered from somewhere deep inside her, "No, my child. Thank you for remembering." And as Elise turned off the lights, the golden paint seemed to shimmer one last time, just long enough to catch the reflection of a woman standing in the frame, smiling softly before fading into the quiet. The world had grown smaller. Airplanes crossed oceans in hours. Voices traveled through invisible threads of light, and human faces flickered across screens, faster than thoughts. Yet despite all this connection, loneliness filled the air like mist. People spoke more, but listened less. They saw everything, but felt nothing. And in that quiet ache, between what they had and what they needed, Freya began to awaken again. She no longer appeared in dreams as she once had. She was no longer the woman of gold standing beneath the northern lights. Now she lived in the subtler places. The pause between a heartbeat and a sigh, the moment when someone forgave without being asked, the instant before a tear fell. That was her new form, invisible, infinite, woven into emotion itself. The first to feel her were not the powerful or the wise, but the ordinary, the forgotten ones. A nurse sitting alone after a night shift, holding the hand of a patient who would not wake again. A man leaving flowers on a grave, even though no one was watching. A young woman wiping tears from her friend's face and saying, "You'll be okay," though she wasn't sure if it was true. In those small moments, Freya stirred. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was the warmth behind empathy, the pulse behind kindness. When someone reached out to comfort another, it was her hand guiding theirs. When someone chose compassion instead of pride, her light flickered faintly around them. Humanity thought it was simply emotion, but it was divinity rediscovered. Art began to change too. Musicians wrote songs about light returning after loss. Writers filled their pages with tales of healing. Painters, even those who had never heard her name, began to use more gold, not for wealth, but for meaning. They said the color felt alive, though they couldn't explain why. Across the world, people who had never met began sharing similar dreams. A field glowing in soft golden light, A woman standing in the distance, her face blurred but kind. They would wake feeling calm, often with tears they couldn't explain. Psychologists called it a shared subconscious. Mystics called it awakening. Freya simply smiled. One evening, Elise, the woman who had painted her, sat watching the sunset. Years had passed since her first dream, and though her art had reached countless souls, she still felt that gentle pull inside, a connection to something beyond her understanding. As the sky turned from crimson to amber, she whispered, "Are you still here?" The air around her grew warmer, got double quotes, yes. A voice said, not from outside, but within. Elise closed her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," the voice replied. "You already are." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from a strange peace. She let them fall, and as they touched her hands, the last rays of sunlight turned them gold. That night, in cities across the world, countless others felt the same quiet shift. In Tokyo, a violinist wrote a song she couldn't explain. In Nairobi, a teacher forgave a friend who had betrayed her. In Buenos Aires, an old man donated all his savings to an orphanage. They didn't know it, but each act shimmered faintly with Freya's touch, her energy spreading through hearts like dawn. The gods, far above, felt it too. Asgard, once silent, began to breathe again. The stars above its golden halls flickered brighter, responding to the pulse of love below. Odin stood on the edge of the clouds, looking down. "It begins again," he said. Freya appeared beside him. "Not through temples or prayers," she said. "Through hearts." Odin smiled faintly. Perhaps that was always the better way. Freya's garden bloomed once more. Flowers of every color opened as if remembering sunlight. The air shimmered with warmth. The cats who had once pulled her chariot purred and stretched in the grass. For the first time in ages, she felt no distance between herself and the world below. She didn't need to wander anymore. She was already everywhere she needed to be. But as she stood among her flowers, she felt something new, a faint tremor in the threads that connected everything. Humanity was awakening, yes, but not all awakenings are gentle. For every act of kindness, there was still cruelty. For every love, there was still loss. She could feel wars brewing, greed festering, pain multiplying in the same gold that once symbolized her tears. Yet she did not despair, because she understood the pattern. The world turns, always balancing creation and destruction, joy and sorrow. Love isn't the end of suffering. It's what makes it bearable. And as long as even one heart chooses love over indifference, her essence will never fade. In the quiet of the night, she walked among dreams again. A child saw her and asked, "Why do people hurt each other?" Freya knelt, her golden hair glowing faintly in the dark. "Because they forget," she said. "Forget what?" The child asked. "That they are made of the same light." The child nodded slowly, and when he woke, he hugged his mother for no reason. Freya smiled. "That's how it begins again," she whispered. By morning, Elise's paintings had spread online. Millions saw them, each feeling something they couldn't quite name. Nostalgia for something they had never lived. Faith in something they couldn't see. Comments poured in. "This feels familiar. I don't know why, but I cried. It reminds me of someone I miss." Freya moved through those moments like wind through trees. She had become more than memory now. She was resonance. Asgard's sky glowed brighter, not from the fire of war or the light of stars, but from reflection, humanity's collective remembering, rising like a new dawn. And Freya, standing amidst her blooming garden, whispered with quiet certainty, "They're remembering the gold within." She raised her hand, and the petals around her turned into soft light, carried by the wind across realms. Those lights would find their way into every corner of Earth, into art, kindness, forgiveness, and love. And wherever they landed, someone, somewhere, would pause, feeling peace for no reason, warmth without source, love without name. That was her legacy. Not temples, not worship, just remembrance. Freya's tears no longer fell. They shone, and their light never dimmed again. Morning broke over the world, as if it had always been waiting. The air was clear, the light soft, and for the first time in countless ages, silence didn't feel empty. It felt whole. Humanity had reached a strange place in its long journey. They had built towers that touched the clouds, sent voices into the void, and written every possible word about love. And yet, beyond all their noise, something gentle had begun to rise. A return, a remembering. The kind of truth that didn't arrive with thunder, but with breath. Freya no longer walked among them. She no longer needed to. She was the breath, the pulse, the rhythm in every chest. Her story had dissolved into their blood like light into water. When they laughed, she was there. When they wept, she was there too. And when they reached for one another in forgiveness, she was the hand guiding them toward warmth. The world had changed its gods, but not its needs. The longing for connection, for something greater than oneself, still burned as quietly as ever. Temples were now cities, and prayers had become thoughts whispered in the dark before sleep. Yet, within that silence, her voice lingered. Not a sound, but a knowing. Children still dreamed of her, though they called her by different names. To some, she was light. To others, hope. In languages new and old, she had become what she always was, love remembered. One night, Elise stood again before her painting, now old and cracked with time. It hung in a museum, surrounded by other works born of the same mystery. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands slower but sure. Visitors walked by without recognizing her, yet every time someone paused and smiled at the painting, she felt that same quiet ache in her heart. A child stood before it, staring up in awe. "Who is she?" he asked his mother. The woman smiled. "I don't know, sweetheart. But she looks kind, doesn't she?" The boy nodded. "She looks like someone who misses you, even if she doesn't know you." Elise's eyes filled with tears. That was it. That was the essence of Freya. Love without possession. Care without condition. The echo of connection that outlives the body, the story, even the name. Later that night, Elise walked home under the city lights. Rain had begun to fall, gentle and silver. She tilted her face upward and felt the cool drops on her skin. For a brief moment, one of them shimmered gold in the streetlight. She smiled, whispering softly, "Still here." And far above, beyond the stars, Freya smiled too. The universe itself seemed to breathe with her. The worlds, seen and unseen, pulsed in harmony, as if the roots of Yggdrasil had grown through time itself, binding gods, mortals, and memory into one living whole. The tree no longer stood in Asgard. It stood everywhere, in the veins of rivers, in the pattern of galaxies, in the neural sparks of every mind that still dared to love. Odin, older than ever, sat beneath those invisible branches, watching the golden shimmer that now touched every realm. "You've done what even I could not," he said softly, though she was no longer a form he could see. "You became the lesson itself." Her voice, soft as wind through leaves, answered, "You searched for wisdom. I found love." They were always the same thing. Odin closed his eye and smiled. Then the cycle is complete. But Freya's essence rippled through existence, whispering, "No, Allfather. It only changes shape." And so it did. In the centuries that followed, the gold within the earth began to lose its luster. People no longer valued it as they once had. What mattered now were invisible things, the sound of laughter, the comfort of a hand held, the silence shared between souls. Gold, stripped of greed, became again what it was meant to be, a symbol of love that endures through loss. Freya's story found its way into art, into music, into the quiet philosophies of those who sought meaning beyond matter. Some called it awakening. Others called it evolution. She called it remembering. In time, scholars would debate her existence. Was Freya real, or only a metaphor? They missed the point, as scholars often do. She was both. She was as real as kindness, as tangible as peace. You couldn't measure her, but you could feel her in every sincere gesture that crossed the distance between hearts. And when the last temple crumbled and the last myth faded, her presence remained. Because she was never built, she was born. Born in the first tear shed for love, and alive in every one since. On a quiet morning somewhere in the far north, a young woman stood by the sea. She didn't know why she was there. Something had simply drawn her. The water was still, the horizon soft. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If you can hear me, thank you." The wind rose gently, wrapping around her like an embrace. When she opened her eyes, the surface of the sea shimmered faintly, a trail of light stretching into the distance. For a heartbeat, she saw a woman walking along it, golden hair, calm smile, and then the vision dissolved into sunlight. She didn't speak of it to anyone. She simply went home, sat by the window, and began to write. The words came easily, as if they had been waiting for her. Love is not gone. It has only learned to change its shape. That phrase spread across the world, quoted, painted, shared. People didn't know where it came from, but it reached millions. Some read it on a screen, others on a wall. Others whispered it in the dark to someone they loved. Every time they spoke it, Freya's essence moved again, threading through human connection like breath. She had become what she always was meant to be, not a goddess above. But the golden pulse within. No one prayed to her anymore, and that was how she preferred it. True love asks for nothing. When the last stars of the night faded and the first light of dawn spread across the earth, Freya's presence flowed through the wind, through the sea, through every open heart. She was no longer a myth to be remembered. She was remembrance itself. And as the world turned beneath her eternal light, her final whisper echoed softly through every living thing. Do not worship what you have lost. Love what still remains.